Jacksonville. He also serves on the TRIO National Board, and he's a sounding board to me on, like, I get a lot of questions, and I can always call him up and get an answer. So please welcome Dr. Tom Peters.
Thanks, Steve. Apologies for the slides, and thanks for having me back. JT asked me to talk a little bit about a subject that has been in the news, actually, over the last year or two, and sporadically before that time, and that topic is financial incentives in organ donation. And what I want to do is pass out the TRIO position statement on benefits, rewards, and incentives for organ donation, and I'll allude to TRIO from time to time over the course of this discussion. I don't have enough copies for everyone, but if we could just perhaps every other person take one, you can refer to that from time to time if you wish.
And it's also on our website if you want to look
It's on
at it
our
later.
website. Now, let's first of all define what a financial incentive would be. And I'm going to confine our comments until the discussion period to deceased donor transplantation, cadaveric organ donors. A financial incentive would be a limited, regulated survivor benefit offered or paid to the enabling next of kin. That is the person who gives consent to donation, as a gratuity, recognizing that consent for completed organ recovery is a life-saving gesture. Okay? So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about saving lives, positive social persuasion, with development of that social persuasion through real-time pilot studies. That's what the TRIO position statement calls for. Not for implementation of such a notion, but for studying it. And then basing any implementation on data. Right now our policy is based on hunches and opinions about financial incentives, and TRIO's position statement would base it on data. I actually think that this would enfranchise people and families who are now disenfranchised. It might even improve minority access to transplantation. This subject is before us because now the waiting list for deceased donor organs or cadaveric organs is over 100,000 people. And the number of donors has not really appreciably changed over the last decade or so. And in fact, over the last 4 years, the number has been static. And 07 to 08, the number of cadaveric donors went down. And if we look at the total number of deceased donor transplants in America, and those who die waiting for an organ or are removed from the waiting list because they're too sick, the numbers are roughly as follows. The number of transplants done in 2007, we don't have actually all the data for 08 yet, but the number of transplants done in 07 was roughly 22,000. And that includes heart, lung, liver, pancreas, the whole gamut. The number of people who died waiting or were removed from the list because they were too sick was just under 10,000. So 22,000 were transplanted, some 9,000 odd number died on the list. And over the course of the last 13 years inclusive, up to the end of 2007. So from 95 to 07 inclusive, there were 237,000 organ transplants done, and nearly 100,000 people who died waiting for a transplant. Died or were removed from the list. Now, we need to be clear about removing somebody from the list. If the patient is removed from the list because the patient is too ill, that patient goes on to die without an organ transplant. Because for all organs, you can make the patient an inactive status and not remove the patient from the list. So if the patient is removed because the patient is too sick, it means that the patient was placed on the list with the intention to transplant and then became progressively ill and the docs gave up. Or died. We like to think of kidney transplantation as the organ in which there is some reserve, the dialysis machine. But actually the numbers are more stark in kidney transplantation. So in 2007, 10,568 cadaveric transplants were done in America, and 6,000 people either died waiting for a kidney or were removed from the list because they were too sick. And if we look at a decade's experience, 1998 through 07, those years, 89,000 kidney transplants were done in America, deceased donor transplants, and 48,000 people died waiting or were removed because they were too sick. And so what epidemiologists call that is the prevalence of the event. So the prevalence of transplantation of kidneys was 89,000. The prevalence of death was 48,000, more than half. So the thought process here is one of saving lives, and we need to think, is it really better that these people die, or is it better that we test every single way to obtain these organs for transplantation, that is, recover them from donors who could give life-saving organs? Right now, in America, when a cohort of donors is studied, or of potential donors, we know that of all those persons who could donate after death and the organs would be used, that is, they are suitable donors, 7 out of 10 are consented, 3 out of 10 families say no. So the consent or conversion rate, as it is now called, is 70%. So what's the rationale for financial incentives? Once again, organs save lives. Altruism is not universal. 30% of the population says no. There are varying success rates among OPOs, but there is no OPO that has 100% consent rate. Interestingly, in our country, in the United States, survivor benefits, death gratuities, are part of our culture. They are attached to the common things we all know about. There is a Social Security death benefit. There are Veterans Administration death benefits. There are active duty military death benefits, and there are reserve military death benefits. I was a commissioned Army officer for over 30 years, and most of that time was reserve time. Were I to die on a reserve weekend in my Army suit, my wife would have gotten a death gratuity. Were I to have died on a Thursday evening giving a lecture to a group like this as a civilian, the lecture would be cut short, but Ruby would not get a nickel. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that participation means eligibility. And there are special situations in death gratuities and payments. I mean, think of the 9/11 victims in those Twin Towers and at the Pentagon, the civilians. I mean, there was an awful lot of money given to those families, if you'll recall. So, participation equals eligibility. So if you participate, if you give the organs, you get the benefit. It's a societal recognition of the contribution. It's regulated, universally applied, but not mandatory. My wife would not have had to accept the death gratuity from the Army. So anyone surviving next of kin who enabled organ donation would not have to accept such a gratuity. And it would be given with empathy, just as other death gratuities are. And it could be related to funeral expenses. It could be bypassed by the family if the family wished to give to a charity, TRIO. It could mean that the family, if in need of an organ transplant later on, would get preferred status on the list, or even other benefits. So I think we would need to be honest as a nation and admit that this is a potential solution to a life-endangering problem. And TRIO has, in its position statement, taken to the notion that we ought to study this real time. And we can talk about how that might be done if you would wish. The idea that altruism should be the only motive in organ donation is one that is wearing thin because it's costing lives. And we need to promote policy about these things based on information, based on data, not based on what our good wishes might be. Our good wishes have not been as productive, I don't think, as they could be. Now, how to do this? Many of you would know the name Alan Spector. He's a senator from Pennsylvania, and there is a bill coming out of his office, and I brought 2 copies, and we'll talk about this bill a little bit. And actually, TRIO is mentioned in this bill. On page 4, it indicates that since 2002, pilot studies of the provision of government benefits to encourage organ donation have been endorsed by the United States Department of Health and Human Services Advisory Committee on Organ Transplantation, United Network for Organ Sharing, Association of Organ Procurement Organizations, American Association of Kidney Patients, American Society of Transplant Surgeons, American Society of Transplantation, that's the physician side, Polycystic Kidney Disease Foundation, American Association of Kidney Banks, and Transplant Recipients International Organization, as well as the AMA. Okay?
What is that bill number?
It doesn't have a number.
Doesn't have a number?
The bill does not yet have a number yet. It's in preparation in Spector's office. But it has gained the endorsement of, I mean, those endorsements I've just read you are from the bill as it is currently written. It has had a number of iterations. The National Kidney Foundation is not on board, I'm sorry to say. But there are very few organizations who are opposing this notion. Now, some of you may have heard of the National Kidney Foundation's End the Wait program, which has just sort of hit the street. And it has 4 components. They want to improve transplant outcomes because if you make the kidney last longer, the patient doesn't need a second transplant. Want to increase deceased donation, and they do admit to the utility of perhaps funding some of the portion of funeral expense, but not the larger spectrum, if you will, of financial incentives. They spend a lot of time in on, or a lot of print rather, on notions to increase living donation as well as the efficacy and equity of donation. The end the wait is a better position than the Kidney Foundation had prior to several months ago. But it doesn't bring anything new to the table. All of the things I read to you and virtually all of the features of the end the wait details are very much the same as the Breakthrough Collaborative, other efforts to increase organ donation. So I would pose the issue very much as the TRIO document does. And that is that in cadaveric organ donation, we need to have well-regulated, sensibly designed trials of financial incentives, just like I said at the beginning, which recognize the life-saving value of organs recovered and which go to the enabling next of kin, just as other benefits in our country would. So, without the slides, that's our discussion, and I'd be happy, JT, to open it up to the floor.
I have a question for living donors. Of course, the surgery, I had a living donor. The surgery and everything is covered, but what if that living donor, if their company they work for, especially if they're low income, won't pay their salary while they're recuperating?
Well, the End the Wait program, as well as the Spectre bill, seeks to relieve that feature, and actually they seek further to add medical and life insurance to living donors. Almost all living donors are kidney donors now, but you know, there's a plan that's been in America for almost 10 years called the Living Organ Donor Network, LODN. It tracks the living donors, 1 year of disability insurance, 1 year of life insurance, 1 year of health insurance, and 5 hospitals in America have bought into the program.
Wow.
5. And it's exactly the same program that operates at Mayo for their marrow donors. Every marrow donor program in America has this insurance policy. So every hospital that does marrow donation uses this Living Organ Donor Network underwriter, but very few of them do it for living kidney donors.
Why? What?
I don't know why. I was actually involved in the early phases of LODN, and I think it was the idea of a small group of people who were not influential, and those who were felt as though, since it was not their idea, they would not support it. So, and it did cost money. It cost about $600 per donor. So the hospital has to be willing to pay a little something. But I mean, $600 for a year of life, health, and disability insurance is pennies.
It's pennies, and chicken feed.
Yes, sir.
Well, that would be sort of like what I would be getting at if there was, let's say, this underwriter that would write an insurance that people would participate as to whatever folks participate at. But let's say that individual passes away and there's next of kin that would receive the monies. At the next gurney, there's an individual that didn't participate. Now, who would be paying that $600? Would it be
No, the program is universal for the hospital. The hospital must agree to participate with every donor. For the very reason you state. And look, living donor deaths are rare. There's been one, to my knowledge, in the last 4 years in kidney transplantation. I'm aware of several others between '01 and '03. But they're quite rare, thankfully, but they do occur.
I'm thinking about folks that CDs, cadaveric. You have one that has this benefit and another, they're both deceased. And
Okay, you're talking about deceased donor then, not living donor,
Yeah,
okay?
CDs, that's what we're talking about.
All right.
And one did participate in paying his $600 a month.
No, that's in a living donor situation.
Well, that's in a living.
That's in a living donor
Oh,
situation.
okay.
The financial incentives in cadaver donor situation is an inducement to say, yes, take the organs.
Who's going to pay that inducement? Where's the money going to come from?
Well, in the Specter bill, it would come from some governmental agency. Now, that can be construed to be the OPOs, which are really agencies of a government contractor. The Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network is the government. UNOS is the contractor, and the OPOs are agencies of UNOS.
Then you would have your potentially 100% transplantation rate,
Donation.
donation
Rate.
rate.
Well, I don't know that we'd ever get to 100%, because I think there would be people who would say no, no matter what. But there are ample studies to show that those who do say no now would probably say yes if they felt as though the medical circumstance was treating them fairly. Their thought now is that everyone profits from the removal of the organs, but the family gets nothing.
When my father passed away, there was 5 children, my mother, and we got survivor benefits. And when we got those checks, I remember my mother and all of us kids sitting, we all started sobbing because the country we came from, if your father died, you get thrown out into the streets. There's no safety net. And that's what we thought was going to happen to our family. We were pretty much recent, but I still remember those tears. It was tears of survival. I mean, we were going to survive. And to me, I just can't imagine not giving these folks that check.
Well, right now, there is no check.
Right.
There's nothing but a thank you letter.
And that's not going to feed the bulldog.
The 30% that don't donate, what's the main reason?
It's hard to get at the reason why people say no by asking them, why do you say no? And so the studies that have been done have gotten to that answer by other means. Let me give you an example of a study that I actually participated in. It was in the mid-90s, and it was through grants from the National Kidney Foundation and UNOS. What we did was we went to 7 cities: Phoenix, Philly, I think Detroit, Atlanta, 3 others. And we had professional facilitators in a room very much like this, and literally off the street recruited people and paid them for a session on organ donation. And we had the people self-identify, and they self-identified as they're being donors after their death, or they're not being donors after their death. And the donors went to one place, the non-donors to another. And the facilitators were pros. They did the questions and answers the same in every room. The donors were societal participants They came to meetings like this. They went to church. They were engaged in the community. They were neither rich nor poor, but they looked outward. And they trusted their neighbors, they trusted their doctors, and so on. The non-donors were not participants. They were suspicious of any societal organization, felt as though they should not donate because what's in it for them? And essentially were those persons who are disenfranchised from society. And this was pretty clear. This was really very, very good. Now the excuses that they used were manifold. Religion, transplantation doesn't work, money should be spent for something else, and so on and so forth. In fact, in one non-donor group, the most striking thing in this study, to me, was that there was a chap who identified himself as a non-donor. So he's sitting in the room, and one of the early questions in the session was, do you think transplants work? And go around the room, and in the non-donor room, of course, most people said no. Get to this one chap, about 60. He said, yeah, I think they work. I play golf with a guy who has a heart transplant. You know, and people perked up. And this chap said, you know, he plays golf twice a week. He's doing fine. And yet, he was a non-donor. And he was a non-donor in part because he really thought his friend was the exception to the rule. Transplants really didn't work. They worked that time, but they don't ever work any other time. Now, that's a striking, intensely held kind of feeling that has to be overcome some way. And good karma doesn't do it. Good money might. Yes, sir.
You mentioned at first, you talked about it a little bit now, that 3 out of 10 said no last year. 10 years ago, would that number have been the same?
That number was about 45 or 50 out of 100. So the consent rate has improved.
Okay, it has.
But, and this is the big but, 10 years ago, we would not have been asking for organ donation from older potential donors, from people in their 60s, who are far more mature and far more likely to say yes with the life experiences that they've had than people in their 30s and 40s. And so those who are turning us down now, the real number of turn downs is about the same in terms of the standard criteria donor, okay? Because we've expanded the criteria, we have improved the consent rate mostly in that set, but not entirely. It's improved across the board, but not where we need to be.
Isn't it also an educational process in that before Ron had his transplant, even I would have said, what would they want with my old organs? You know, I'm too old to give my organs.
It's partly an educational process, but this is a matter which is important, but it's a matter that the industry has hidden behind for 3 decades. In the years 1996 to 2002, the Ad Council had as one of its major thrusts organ donation. So here we have Smokey Bear, Seatbelt, we got the Ad Council. In that 6 or 7 years, the number of public service announcements and other materials, billboards and other, amounted to, in kind, and real money totaling more than $1 billion. Now, $1 billion doesn't sound like a lot today with the way we're kicking the economy around. But imagine if somebody were to say to you, I'll give you $1 billion to do a 6-year ad campaign. It didn't move organ donation a twit.
Wow.
Not a twit.
Well,
So we've had that study, real time. Now, it's not that we shouldn't be doing education, it's what we're doing tonight. But it doesn't do it. Driver's license doesn't do it. None of that stuff does it.
No, I was really amazed that when you put it, because I've been in the medical profession for a lot of years, and to know that people can put that on their driver's license, and when the time comes, it's no longer their decision, it then becomes a family decision to override that.
Actually, in several states, that's not true any longer. It's not true in Florida, it's not true in Texas.
Okay, good.
It's not true in, legislatures have been helpful there. And so in some states, if there is an identifiable document, driver's license is sufficient, an end-of-life document that the decedent has signed, the family cannot reverse that decision unless they can produce an other individual who attests that in the time since the signature, the potential donor changed his or her mind. So there has to be an attestation under oath by someone other than the enabling family member.
That's good.
And I've seen that happen, by the way, once. And it was a nurse who would not give her son's organs. And she probably caused another person to perjure herself.
Wow.
Yeah. I
A lot
mean,
of lies.
nobody would pursue a perjury,
yeah,
Sure.
but it's probably what happened.
well,
Yeah.
Has there been an increase in living donors and that's?
Actually, there is a substantial decrease in living donors because of
Decrease
because UNOS regulations have carved out several spots for kidney recipients of certain characteristics. So, any potential kidney recipient, age 18 or under, gets the first shot at any cadaveric kidney from a donor age 34 and under. And therefore, pediatric nephrologists have rightly said to patients, families, look, let's save the adult, the parent kidney for the second or third transplant because this is a kid, he's going to need 2 or 3 transplants in his lifetime. A kid, 12-year-old kid, on the list 3-4 months. But that 33-year-old kidney doesn't go to an adult who may not have a living donor. Living donation is down by about, I think, almost 1,000 donors a year to year, 07 to 08. It may not be, it may be in the closer to the 600 or 700. I'm sorry I don't have the number, but I don't, it's down considerably. And there are other UNOS regulations which also really stifle kidney transplantation. And we're trying to address that now in the transplant professional community. For example, the patient who needs a liver kidney trumps the patient who needs a kidney. The kidney goes with the liver. Well, is that really fair? Some would say, let's do this in an OPO where there is a multi-organ center, but that center and all the other centers have kidney-only patients. Let's just say every other suitable donor, the kidney does not follow the other organ. That's what they've done in New York City. And the mortality on the kidney list is growing faster than the mortality on the heart and the liver list. That's no kidding. Yeah.
When I was in North Carolina, I worked in an Indian reservation, and I lost my health insurance when I lost both my kidneys. And one of the things that I kept asking was, I was asked, you need to get onto the transplant list. And I said, really? How do I do that? And who's going to pay for my medicines? And who's going to pay for my doctor care? And I was on hemodialysis for 5 years with that same story. I didn't know how it was going to be done. It wasn't until I came to Florida from North Carolina in 2000. I mean, I was really sick. And I waited for 2.5 years, so that made 5 years completely on hemodialysis, until the doctor finally convinced me, you're dying. You've got to get a kidney. And then my story went to, okay, I'll worry about it, later. So I got my kidney transplant. I guess the moral of the story would be there may be a population out there that's saying this organ transplant service or procurement or whatever is for the rich man. That may be some of the mindset. Because I can't imagine some idiot saying it don't work. I mean, to me, it just doesn't register.
Oh, well, it doesn't register to you because you've got a kidney transplant. I can tell you that about 35 to 50% of Americans are a disenfranchised group. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with income. They do not trust what I say as a doctor. They don't trust what JT says as an accountant. They are disenfranchised. A huge portion of our population is disenfranchised. I don't know why it is, but they are. And look, there are smart people, wealthy people, who won't vaccinate their kids because they think vaccines cause autism. This has become a political issue. They won't believe scientific data. They won't believe what is the predominant and recognizable truth. And different persons have different issues. There are persons who think that there really is life on Mars. Well, okay, that's fine. There probably isn't, but we haven't seen the little man run up to the rover yet. But that doesn't matter. They're on the other side, or they can see the rover, but we can't see them. And so there is a huge portion of our population, and I'm sad to say it. It doesn't make me happy to say it, that does not believe that persons of goodwill abound in America, which is true.
What's
Yes,
the thought process on someone like myself who has had a transplant, and then put my name on the driver's license to say, take the rest of the good ones when I croak?
Yeah, and there have been transplant recipients who are deceased organ donors. It happens rarely for a whole variety of reasons. You're most
Sure.
likely to die of infection.
Right.
What's your organ transplant?
Lung.
Lung, yeah. And so in the course of your demise, you are going to likely have some illness which contraindicates your being an organ donor.
Sure, just from his medications that he's on.
Perhaps, yeah, but there have been recipients who have been organ donors, of course.
Has that organ ever gone to, the recipient's organ, gone to another body? I mean, did you take out a kidney?
Usually the organ which was transplanted
Yeah.
cannot be retransplanted.
It cannot be.
Usually. It has happened, but those are rare occurrences. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But the heart transplant recipient who has a normal liver function should be a good liver donor.
Yep.
Other things considered as appropriate, yeah.
guess the question, I'm Hispanic. What happens if the individual is from a foreign country and he's illegal and he passes away? And would his next of kin, family member, would be able to have that money, take it back to wherever they live in a foreign country?
May not be money.
It may not be money, but it may be money. Money is what would work.
Oh, yeah.
And the answer, I think, would be yes, because a French family traveling in America, auto accident, one of the family members dies. The rules governing what happens to that decedent are American rules, not French rules. They aren't treated under French law until the decedent's remains are shipped to France.
But that visitor may be legal. I'm talking about someone that's...
You mean, and it's legal alien?
Yeah,
Well, legal aliens have, they pursue their livelihood under the laws of the United States.
Right.
So their next of kin would be able to come from, let's say, Peru and pick whatever benefit they would be available.
Well, if that was the law, then that would be the law. But that I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had a donor in an emergency room or in an ICU and had the donor's family come from a foreign country and say, okay, you can or you can't. That just hasn't been part of my experience. I've probably done thousands of donors. Now, it's probably happened, but it's surely a very rare event.
But if there's money available, you never know.
Yeah, but the donor has to die a death suitable for donation.
Yeah.
And that itself is a rare enough circumstance. It's sad to say, but it is. And, you know, I don't know a lot of people. I go to a little church down the road here, San Jose Catholic Church. We've got a lot of Hispanics. We've got a lot of people from Brazil. We have a fairly sizable population from Central Europe, from the Balkan countries. I don't know of one family who's just a person, whose next of kin is back in the old country.
Right.
The family is
Somebody here.
Family
somebody's
here somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking politically, the rub is, currently, is that if they're illegal alien, you know,
He's saying
simple fact.
illegal.
I think you're searching, you're reaching for difficult circumstances. And if those circumstances occur, they need to be dealt with on a one-time basis. The 30% who say no aren't people who have their nearest relative in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're people whose nearest relative is 10 feet away.
Yep.
Has their same views.
Yeah.
Out of that 30%, is there anyone that ever comes back and says, I made a mistake, I should have said
Rarely.
this, but in my grief, I didn't."
Rarely.
Rare.
Rarely.
Wow.
What are our chances that Specter's bill's gonna go through?
Slim. This is, I was running out of ink. JT, why don't you can pass around, you can have that one. Specter's bill has actually become a bit of a Christmas tree. You know what I mean? When a bill becomes a Christmas tree, one person hangs this ornament on, another person hangs this ornament, another person, they hung Trio on. Trio's an ornament now on the Christmas tree. And it needs to be, instead of a 10-page bill or a 7-page bill or whatever it is, it needs to be a 2-page bill. And that's what really gets through Congress. Well, we've got to start though, and we've got the endorsements of the AMA. I actually worked on that one. I'm an AMA delegate, and it was fun to do that. We've got endorsements of TRIO and other important organizations. And so this bill will not come out of committee this year, I don't think. But I think a bill next year in this Congress has a good chance of passing because more people are going to die. This donation is going to go down.
Well, and the more you write your senator and congressman, the better it will be.
Yeah, it's really true, and it's most effective once a bill is out.
You bet.
Right now, most of the work is in gathering some of Specter's
Sure.
colleagues to sign on to what would become a bill. It's not a bill until it gets into committee.
Would it help if we wrote our congressman and said, just to let you know,
It would.
this is
It would
happening,
indeed.
It would.
would like to add our names as supporting?
I've never been bashful about writing my congressman.
Yeah.
That's for
Yeah,
sure.
you want to fax them, don't you? Because the letters don't get there.
Emails.
Emails work fine.
Emails work real good.
Yeah.
Kind of off topic a little bit, are you familiar with I don't even know the correct terminology for it, the organ sharing? Like I had someone from North Carolina call us the other day and say, she'd like to give Tammy her kidney
Right.
because she knows she's going to need a third one. But she's probably not the same blood type. But if she donated hers, would that move Tammy up the list or allow her to?
There are a number of very interesting and innovative projects now. Tammy needs a kidney, and my wife Ruby needs a kidney. You match Ruby, I match Tammy, we swap. We match neither, but you match a third party, I match a fourth party, and there's a domino effect. And there's been several of those done, and they've been in the paper. A guy named Bob Montgomery at Johns Hopkins is really interested in that and has done a domino set of, I think, 6 or 8 donor recipient pairs.
Wow.
So we're getting more innovative. But I gotta tell you, one living donor is very hard work. And 3 or 4 or 5 on the same day is a monumental task. I mean, you virtually have to give up you have to drop everything you're doing for a month to put something like that together, or have the resources and people to do that. I'd love to do it, but I don't have the resource.
Dr. wasn't that the situation that was on television just this last week? I believe it was where there were 6 or 8 people.
That was Bob.
It was him, and I think several different hospitals
Yeah.
participated. It really was a monumental day.
And he's done this now 3 times, I think, and the second time there was a kidney that moved from one coast to the other, west coast to east or east to west, I can't remember now.
Yeah, that was part of the coordination,
Yeah.
the timing.
Right.
One goes to the other.
Any more questions?
All right, well, thank you very much.
Dr. Peters,
Oh my goodness.
we had to go do this
We have.
at the conference, but you left too early.
What is this now?
It says, TRIO National Board of Directors, Transplant Recipients International Organization, Inc., honors and congratulates Thomas G. Peters, MD, Professor of Surgery, University of Florida College of Medicine, Chief Department of Transplant Surgery, Shannis Jacksonville Transplant Center, the National Board of Directors and membership of Transplant Recipients International, Inc. recognizes Thomas G. Peters, MD, for his support of transplant recipients, candidates waiting for an organ transplant, and their families. Members through his activities as medical advisor and member at large of the TRIO, Inc. National Board of Directors. Dr. Peters is always willing to take a stand and express his opinion on issues that he believes are best for TRIO, Inc. He is always available to all board members to answer their questions. Thank you, Dr. Peters, for your service to TRIO. J.P. Rhodes, CPA.
Well, thank you all. It's been a lot of fun.